So Penn State loses to Michigan 24-15, and I think it's important to analyze further some of the biggest mistakes that came from this game. I feel like there's still a lot to discuss. Already did a recap, but now I think we should do a live recap and hear from you, the audience, the fans, on what ultimately went wrong in this Penn State Michigan game. Here on Locked On Nittany Lions.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I appreciate each and every one of you making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Zach Seyko. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I do have some topics in case the conversation gets a little bit of a delay in the chat, but I'm looking to hear your feedback specifically so we can have a dialogue about this Penn State Michigan debacle. Forever 10-2. Is this the program's ceiling? I'm going to start off with Penn State's biggest mistakes in this game and why it ultimately led to the demise and how they had a chance. They were in this game. This was a 50-50 ball game, but because of some huge mistakes, Penn State was not able to get this one done, and now college football playoff aspirations are over. How excited can you be about a bowl game when this was supposed to be the year that Penn State takes this next step? And there's so many things we can hit on, but help out the channel. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Let me know the feedback from the game, about the show. I want to hear from you, but we're going to start with Penn State's biggest mistakes. I'm going to start with the worst ones, going to the ones that were not as inconsequential, or not as consequential, I should say here, but pretty damning, may I add. This one bothered me the most. You're going for two late in the game, the way they did. And James Franklin was asked about this in the press conference, and I'm glad I didn't have to be the one to ask it. I didn't really want to get coach's reaction to this one because it didn't make any sense. And if you watch the press conference, it is up on the Locked On Nittany Lions YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, so you can listen to him back. You can watch it back. But Dave Jones from Penn Live did actually ask the question pretty directly. What was the reasoning? What was the logic behind? He asked about both 2-point conversions because you can. I scratched my head at the one where Penn State would have been down 14-10 had you just kicked the extra point. And then the one late in the game, same thing. Kick the extra point, it's 24-16. And you keep yourself in the game. So we'll start with the second 2-point conversion because I actually don't have that big of a problem with the first one. But you are taking that risk of playing from a different type of deficit. You are not playing from a traditional football score type of deficit. You're going into another one. Five points it's different. It's weird. It's not typical. The field goals, the way the touchdowns break, I'll explain that in a moment. Why he did that and why I don't disagree with it. But the second one I significantly disagree with, and I think that's. I know Penn State's playing from behind, but this one just was a huge mistake to me because it did so many things to the team in the moment. One, it takes you out of the game. First of all, it took you completely out of the game, even before the game was truly over. I kept saying on the sideline, I really hope I'm down on the sideline for the final 5 minutes of the game. I really don't want them to go for two. I'm thinking, I really don't want them to go for two. They're not going to go for two, right? They go for two. It's 24-15. What does that do by going for two? Because you still need a touchdown to tie the game. I know you need a 2-point conversion, but why not let yourself be down by 8, a score that you can tie, as opposed to being down by 9 with less than 2 minutes to go? Okay, game's still somewhat out of reach here. You're down by 8. Say it is 24-16. And this is what really, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And I know it probably doesn't make a lot of sense to all of you. So I'm happy to have this discussion with any of you as well who want to join the chat. You're down 24-16. Let's set the stage again. For those watching the game, Penn State's still in it if it's 24-16. You have roughly 2 minutes in the game. You have 2 timeouts in college football. The defense, up until that point of having that short field and Blake Corum scores that, a 30-yard touchdown there, they held them to 17 points. Let me add on top of that, J.J. McCarthy is far from 100%. He's hurt. He's banged up. And no, it wasn't his shoulder. It wasn't his wrist. It wasn't his finger. It was his legs. I'm not a doctor. I've said that how many times, but he was clearly hobbled. He was not really moving the way he should be as a fully healthy quarterback. So J.J. McCarthy's whose legs bailed out Michigan more often than it should have throughout that game was now not a factor. So consider all of that. And Penn State, James Franklin, Mike Yurcich, everyone went into that decision making. The Penn State offensive collective said that we need to go for this. And I know that, and James Franklin's ultimately the one, right? He's the head coach. He makes that decision. He signs it. I don't know who had that input. Was it Mike Yurcich? Was it Danny O'Brien as well, right? Guys who are a part of the offensive system. How much input when they have that discussion in the moment? But James Franklin ultimately co-signs it. But remember, Mike Yurcich is calling the offense. He calls those plays. And if he feels like, hey, James, we should really go for 2 here. I have a play. James Franklin's got to veto that unless he goes up to the booth and calls up to the booth and says, we're going for it. Find your best play. Whatever it was, the offensive coaches really, really failed in this moment. You have 2 timeouts. You have 2 minutes. You have a Michigan team that you know is going to run the same type of running plays in those final minutes. Okay, you call your 2 timeouts. This is obvious. This obviously hinges on forcing a 3 and out. But I'm assuming that the defense does because you know where Blake Corum's going. You know where Donovan Edwards is going. You know that McCarthy is not as mobile anymore. You have 2 timeouts, and this isn't the NFL where the clock continues to wind. So you get the football back. 1 minute and 20 seconds in college football. That is what you hypothetically would have gotten the football back with. Maybe I'm splitting hairs here. Maybe it's 110. You definitely have over 60 seconds. You get Michigan at their 25. You force a 3 and out hypothetically. And then you get the football back with 120 to go and a chance to tie it. And anything can happen in college football. And remember, the clock stops under 2 minutes when the chains move on first down. So you still have ways to stop the clock. You can spike it. Time just doesn't accelerate as fast in college football because of those rules still. NFL's a little different, and it's a little tough. But I felt like that was the biggest mistake of the game. I know they were behind, but how could you just deflate your team like that and not give them a shot? Because when you don't get that 2-point conversion, and I don't even want to dissect what that play was. It's easy to be sit in this chair and be an armchair offensive coordinator. It really is. But that reminds me of those, like that Indianapolis Colts play where they just spread out all the offensive linemen. Michigan defenders are standing there. They're waiting. Do we attack Drew Aller? Do we stay back? There were too many Michigan players and not enough Penn State players because you sent all the Nittany Lions over to the far sideline to do what exactly? Distract Michigan. They were still outnumbered in the red zone there. And so the play call was not great. The going for it itself was not good. And that just was absolutely deflating. It could have been 24-16. I feel like you could have at least put yourself in a position to tie. And they didn't. And I don't know why you wouldn't do that in the game to save your season. And then James Franklin didn't have an explanation for it. He didn't answer it. He refused to answer it. I think it was right for Dave Jones to push for an answer and say, I don't understand why you're not acknowledging. And James Franklin said, I answered it. If that's genuinely how he feels, that points were at a premium and you needed to go for it there, I can't back up the logic. I really can't. And that's part of the mistakes. Being inconsistent. That's another one that I have on my list. But the biggest one of them all is absolutely deflating your team on the sideline and taking your team out of the game too early The game was not over. You had 2 minutes. You had 2 timeouts. You would have been down 1 score and a 2-point conversion, and you decided to go for 2. You get it, fine. It's 24-17, but you still have the same scenario. You still got to drive down the field and convert a point after a touchdown. Yes, it's an extra point instead of a 2, but you still have to do the exact same thing. Stop Michigan on the 3 and out. So why take that scenario away to begin with, period? It's what's really frustrating, and I'm not entirely sure why it was made. I got a few other mistakes. I want to have this conversation with you. We're going to talk some comments as well. So let's take a look at the chat, and hopefully it's all friendly, right? I know that Michigan is giving me a hard time about this one. I believed in Penn State. I really did. You go back to Beaver Stadium. There was revenge on the mind for 18 rushing yards. They blow you out 41-17. It's absolutely embarrassing. You get a reality check from Ohio State. This game feels like it doesn't have as much pressure as the Buckeyes game did, but it still did, because that's how we dubbed it, because that's the way it needed to. That's how it was framed, right? I framed this as a chance to save your season. There's a lot of pressure there. Michigan didn't feel any of that. Michigan didn't have anyone to prove wrong. Penn State did. Penn State had to prove everybody wrong. And unfortunately, after this game, they proved everybody right. I appreciate everyone who's joined the chat here. Let's take a look at some comments. Iowa, Northwestern, Illinois all won. We'd likely have won the tiebreaker and went to the Big Ten championship if we had won today. Just devastating. That's the reality of it. The tiebreaker, and they probably would have faced Iowa in the Big Ten championship, and we know how that one most likely would have ended up, because Penn State matched up well. I heard questions about, okay, why wasn't Penn State able to move the football against Michigan and Ohio State, but Iowa's defense, you were able to do that. You could move the football against Iowa's defense, because Iowa's offense doesn't play complementary football, and it transfers. That same thing can be said about Penn State. Penn State's defense is top 5. It's top 3. And honestly, if it had an offense that gave it a little more of a break, you would see it be number 1, truly, in all the analytics categories, because Penn State's defense does so much well, even under the circumstances, being tired, having to sustain those drives, have an offense that goes 3 and out, and it's like, whoop, you're back on the football field. You thought you were taking your helmet off, Chop Robinson. You got to go back out there. Abdul Carter, get ready. You just had another quick 3 and out after stopping a Michigan team that does extend drives, and you turn them away. But here we go again. Penn State's offense, like Iowa is a worse version of that. Iowa doesn't do anything offensively, and the defense is there to constantly bail them out. Penn State's offense does some things right, not enough, and the defense is there to bail them out. I don't want to get too off track. Let's hear from one of our sponsors, though, on today's episode, because we got to give them a huge shout out there and what makes this show all possible. And one of them on today's episode is Athletic Brewing Company. And now it's time for your game changer, presented to you by Athletic Brewing Company. And I got to go with Denai Dennis Sutton and the Penn State defensive line, because for the amount of time they were on the football field, the amount of times that Michigan ran the football, and I know what Michigan did statistically, but if you actually watch the game and if you read in between the lines, Penn State's defense did a phenomenal job. They were elite. The rush defense had everything thrown at them, and I thought they responded very well. Denai Dennis Sutton, Adisa Isaac specifically, the defensive ends did so much right today. You saw so much progress with Dennis Sutton. Adisa Isaac, it really is a shame that this is his last season. He's an NFL player. He's playing on Sundays. So is Denai Dennis Sutton. But the defensive line, who took a lot of criticism from a year ago, deserves some praise today. And much like Penn State's defensive line, Denai Dennis Sutton, Adisa Isaac, being game changers in this one, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the game with the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, and non-alcoholic beers that are full of strength, well crafted. They taste like a real beer, but they're non-alcoholic. They make IPAs, golden sours, and so much more. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you, or you can buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions, and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. And the Locked On Podcast Network amps up college football coverage every Friday with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, every Friday across all the Locked On College YouTube channels, including Locked On Nittany Lions. So you'll see it here, and that's where they break down all the games and the latest college football news. And Penn State's out of the college football playoff conversation. So unfortunately, I can sit here right now and say I am not getting invited on that show anymore, especially with taking Penn State and thinking that they would win against Ohio State and Michigan. But those guys, the panel does such an incredible job to break down the current weekend slate of games. Check it out every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Join the show live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and listen to it back wherever you get your podcast after the show is over. I got some more mistakes that Penn State definitely, the reason that they lost this game, right? These are the reasons that Penn State lost this game. Similar to going for two when you're down 24-15. You went for it inside of your own territory when it was 17-9. So similar setup, just a different amount of points. Michigan ultimately gets that touch. More time comes off the clock. It felt like time was an enemy to James Franklin. James Franklin did not like this idea of time, and we've seen him struggle with time management before. It had gotten better over about a 3-year period here. I would say over the course of 2020, showed a little bit of progress later on in the season when they went on that winning streak. But then 2021 and 2022, at least time management, that wasn't the biggest thing lingering of why Penn State was losing some of those closer games, right? But here today, it all came back. These ghosts, these demons came back to haunt Penn State. You went for it on 4th down at your own 30, and James Franklin's explanation was we thought points would be at a premium. We wanted to stay aggressive. That was his reasoning. We want to remain aggressive. But I can't sit back and agree with that logic. I really can't. You're at your own 30. Michigan is a ground and pound type of team, so naturally they would have either run out the clock or scored at some point, or eventually both. The fact that Penn State even got the football back at that point was really surprising. So instead of 2 minutes and 2 timeouts after scoring that touchdown for Penn State, it's 17-9. And it's 4th and 6, 4th and 7, thereabouts. It's not like it was 4th and inches and you could have run the T formation, the quarterback sneak that probably would have gotten the first down. I understand that. But it's 4 minutes, you're down 17-9. Again, once again, a 1-score game, this 8-point game where you score and you go for 2. Why are you going for it when your defense to this point has held Michigan to 17 points? It's not like Michigan's offense was consistently pushing Penn State's defense around. They would get their plays. They would get their big plays, the big runs. I know they ran it 32 times in a row. I get that. But Penn State's defense held its own once again. You held Ohio State to 20 points, and up until the late Marvin Harrison touchdown, you did an excellent. You held them to 13 points. And then you held Michigan to 17, right? So why are you not trusting your defense? Flip the field again. Put Michigan back at about the 20. Maybe you get a really good punt out of Riley Thompson. It takes a Penn State roll, and you get them inside the 10. You flip some field position. You say, all right, defense, you've been doing it all afternoon. Let's do it one more time. Stop them here, and then we get the football back after a 3-and-out, or maybe they get 1 first down, and still you get the football back with about 2 minutes, 2 timeouts to go, and there you go. There's your game-winning drive set up. But instead, you give Michigan the opportunity to extend this to a double-digit lead by going for it on 4th and 6. It's not like it was 4th and 1, 4th and inches. It was 4th and 6. So a similar type of thing by going for that 2-point conversion, 24-15. Same thing. Going for it at your own 30 on 4th and 6. It did not make sense. Did you not recognize that J.J. McCarthy was banged up? We all saw it. He was not at full strength. So his legs, his playmaking ability was taken out of the game. Michigan clearly wasn't going to throw it. They had him throw it 8 times in that game. Then he's banged up. And I'm not saying like, injuries are great, but Penn State caught a break. I hate to see injuries, but you have to be able to, when a cornerback goes out in a game, right? A cornerback's taken out for injuries or something, or they got to get checked by the medical team, whether it's temporary or whether it's a full game. What does an NFL or a college football team, what does a good team do? they go target the backup cornerback. So why not go target a Michigan offense that's not at full strength? And you know that Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards are just going to try to run in between the tackles. You had it. You had a situation that benefited you, and you didn't set yourself up for that. And that's coaching. That's coaching. So that leads me to the next one here. Being inconsistent. I mentioned that before the break, but being inconsistent, being afraid to go for it at Michigan's 3-yard line. Points are at a premium. That's all we kept hearing about. We thought this was going to be a low-scoring game, so points were at a premium, right? Why will you go for it on 4th and 6 at your own 30 late in the game when Michigan has proved that they can at least sustain a drive and move the football from time to time, right? But when you're deep in Michigan territory, to really make a statement to open the game, you're taking something away from Michigan here. Michigan's been the team that has been carrying the crown of the Big Ten, and you have an opportunity to make a statement in Beaver Stadium with that hostile environment. You get inside the 5 and you get turned away and you kick a field goal. Coach, I thought points were at a premium in this game. Why did you not go for it? You have a 242-pound quarterback that clearly you were more comfortable using as a runner than as a passer in this game against Michigan. And a lot of this, I don't have a lot of notes. I have some topics listed up on the screen here, but I'm not using notes for the show. This is just kind of the everything that I've thought about from being in the stadium to now doing this live show. You're at the 3-yard line, and you mean to tell me you can't? Remember when against Northwestern, Penn State ran not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 QB sneaks consecutively out of the T formation? Who remembers that? I do. Why aren't you doing that again? Penn State used the T formation quarterback sneak. It's a cheat code. It is a cheat code, and you're not. It's a legal cheat code, and you're not using it. So that's what I don't understand. It's okay. We understand that points are at a premium. Yes, coach. Points are very much at a premium, but why weren't they at a premium when you were inside Michigan's 5-yard line? Go get that 7 points instead of the 3. And then going for the 2-point conversion earlier in the game when it could. I understand it, though. I can reason with that. It's a field goal game with you if you get it, and James Franklin looks like a genius. The analytics do agree with that. It's 14-11. You come out, you get the football. If you drive down the field, you don't convert. It becomes 14-14 if you have that scored. But that's a lot of hypotheticals, right? They didn't convert. So in the same breath, it's 14-10. Penn State is now down 17-10 hypothetically because Michigan kicks that field goal. And then you don't have to roll the dice anymore because it's 17-10. You can just go down and score. And now you're not sweating. There's not this nervousness. You don't have to take additional risks because you took one unnecessarily early in the game. So it feels like deja vu all over again because Penn State should have beaten Michigan this year. Penn State should have beaten Michigan in 2021. Who remembers that 2021 game? The Nittany Lions should have been the reason Michigan did not make the college football playoff. Penn State left 6 points out on the field in that game. It was 21-17. If Penn State converts its field goals in that game, they win 23-21. If Jordan Stout's able to make a 40-yard field goal roughly, right? It's not easy, but it's not the hardest one in the world. I think it was like somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 45 yards. He should have made it. And you go for a fake when it is a short, easy, convertible field goal, and you try to run into a trick play with your punter who is whoever's holding the kick at that time. You don't get it, and you leave 6 points out on the field. So Penn State should have beaten Michigan in 2021, and then they could have beaten them in 2023 here. But that's my point. It's just being inconsistent. It felt like James Franklin had taken the wrong, whenever he was left with a fork in the road in a split 50-50 decision, and it felt like Penn State chose the wrong decision every time. Oddly enough, I think I can count on my hand maybe about 6, 7, or 8 times where Penn State had a 50, like what were they doing? Big game decision affecting moments. And they went 0 for 8. They didn't pick one right once, which was so strange to me. Being inconsistent was huge. And that's not how you get into a rhythm. That's not how you get into a flow and build confidence. Penn State played scared in this game. They played scared. They second-guessed themselves. They didn't trust themselves. The run game was working. Katron Allen was the best offensive player of the day, and for some reason, they only gave him the football 12 times. I'm not sure why Penn State didn't feel like it had the confidence to do all of this. I'm out of breath from this. Let's go back to the comments and hear from you. Michigan would have had to beat Ohio State, but yeah, no, I get your point. If we're talking about the Big Ten championship, everyone's 11-1. That's how the tiebreaker would have had to unfold. Drew Aller doesn't fit the system, bro. Drew Aller does fit the system, actually. The system is designed for a pro-style type of quarterback. But for some reason, Penn State is going away from its system and using him as a dual-threat quarterback. So you have to figure out your identity. Are you going to stick with the pro-style system, run more 12 personnel, 11 personnel, and go under center because Drew Aller is a pocket passer? I think Drew Aller has a lot of talent in terms of his pocket presence. He's very shifty in terms of being in the pocket. He's able to move around. He dodges. For someone who's 6'5", 240 pounds, he moves pretty well for his size. He's not a straight line speedster, but for someone in tight space, is able to move and make defenders miss. I'm very impressed with that. And another comment again, I think Michigan will beat them. It'll be interesting. Michigan is looking for that third win in a row. Ohio State has more pressure on them, and they got to go back to Ann Arbor. Michigan is really hanging its hat on this villain mentality, and it's working for them. It's working for them. It's time to bring back Bill O'Brien. I know what you mean, Bill O'Brien. Typo, right? Gets the best of us. Bill O'Brien doesn't want to coach in college football. He doesn't. He used the Alabama offensive coordinator job to get back into the NFL. He doesn't. If you think he's coming back now, you were dead wrong. I hate in college football back in 2020, in 2012, 2013, and I know he only coached at Penn State for 2 years, but that shows how he doesn't like doing the recruiting. He just wants to do X's and O's. And now you factor in the transfer portal, NIL constantly having. So for someone who doesn't like the recruiting aspect or just would prefer to focus more so on the coaching and the X's and O's part of it, right? James Franklin's really good at his job as a college football head coach because he's good at leading a program. Bill O'Brien, for what it's worth, just did not like doing all of that. So now, not only do you have to recruit players out of high school, you have to re-recruit them to keep them from leaving in the transfer portal. And then you got to factor in NIL. That's just not for Bill O'Brien anymore. He'd rather be back in New England, no matter if it's Mac Jones or a tackling dummy as the quarterback. Bill O'Brien is not coming back. I don't know how serious you are with that comment, Jonathan, but I get what you're saying. The team had shattered expectations under Bill O'Brien here. Sharon Moore has been acting head coach for 2 games and has more top 10 road wins than James Franklin. Yes, the statistic, the fun fact of the hour. That is very much so. I think more. I don't know what Jim Harbaugh's future is at Michigan, but Sharon Moore definitely put himself in a position to be considered as an in-house hire. I'm interested to see if Harbaugh does in fact leave for the NFL, what Michigan ultimately does with what Michigan ultimately, the direction they decide to go in, because they've made outside hires, Rich Rodriguez, Brady Hoke, and then Jim Harbaugh becomes that, one that's affiliated with Michigan. What happens if Harbaugh doesn't stay and does find an NFL job, being linked to the Chicago Bears, right? There are teams that definitely want him back in the NFL. He was so close to signing with the Minnesota Vikings last season, and they just couldn't come to an agreement. He was very close to leaving for the NFL last offseason. Now you have all of this going on. What leads me to believe that he will stick around at Michigan this time? Moronic decisions, running RPO with a pro-style quarterback. Okay, here we go. That's what I mean. Being inconsistent, right? That's what I'm talking about here. Running back standing still when they get the ball. No run sweeps with edge blocking, pass routes with impossible passing angles. It's a sad, sad state. Brooklyn, USA. Thanks for that comment. I think that's very well put. It's not sticking with you don't have confidence in your identity. Own your identity. Your identity this year was elite defense coupled with an offense that could take care of the football. Penn State has turned the ball over 3 times to this point. 2 unfortunate, unlucky footballs. Sometimes that's the way the football bounces. Sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles. But in this case, Penn State can be a run-first team. You have a 5-star and a very highly touted 4-star. Allen's developed very well. I'm still not sure what's going on with Nicholas Singleton, but he had a much better game against Michigan for what it's worth. I know he averaged under 3.5 yards per carry, but the burst was there. Guys were missing blocks. When you watch when you're watching the game in person and then you're up in the press box and you get to see the other view of it. It's called the all 22 when you can see behind the line of scrimmage. So you're almost seeing what the football players see, just not at eye level. And I remember a counter play. Nicholas Singleton, it was a trap. It was a counter. It was wide open, and Singleton could have easily burst through the hole and maybe, who knows? I'm not going to say touchdown, but definitely would have had a 20-plus yard game. And Tyler Warren completely missed his assignment, completely missed the block. It's those things that don't show up on the stat sheet. Everyone's going to point to Singleton. What are you doing averaging 3 yards per carry? But it's plays like that are missed that don't help out his cause. So here we go. What happened to Nicholas Singleton as of last year? I think he's boxed in. I think Nicholas Singleton, a part of it is scheme. Part of it at this point is confidence. When you're a home run threat, all right, I can bring baseball into this. When you're a home run threat, you're not hitting home runs, you're striking out a lot. Your confidence at the plate is going to diminish. You're going to try to change things rather than sticking to basics. You're going to try to change your swing. You're going to change your timing. You're going to change your routine. What's your good luck charm? Do I need to throw it away? I'm not saying Singleton does all of that or has that thought process. He's a very confident young man. I love getting the chance to interview him. He's an outstanding person. He's going to have a great time playing on Sundays. But for Singleton, it's a combination of two things. I think there is a matter. You're not going to hear it from the coaches and the players. I've already said this. However, there's definitely a confidence issue here because the name of his game is big plays, and he's not doing that. The second part of it is scheme. Singleton's is not bouncing it to the outside. I don't know if coaches are telling him to do that, but they are running strict play. They are running inside zone, which means run up the middle. You're running inside the tackles. And Nicholas Singleton, where does most of his damage come from, folks? It comes from outside of the numbers, going away from the line, going outside of the line of scrimmage, going outside of the tackle box. Why aren't we having, and I get the point of, Nicholas Singleton isn't running downhill. They're not running under center and giving these running backs a head start. You don't even have to. Why not have him to the hip of Drew Aller and then pitch it to the outside and say, hey, defense, go chase him. Because it's going to get you some yards. Quick pass, Nicholas Singleton in the flat on a sweep play. Why can't you do that? Why can't you do it once or twice? Or once or twice is not enough, but that's the thing. We'll see it once, almost randomly, and then we'll never see it again. Like, what is Michigan supposed to do? Immediately defend that and say, hey, we're going to wait for that because it keeps happening. No, I don't know why. The third thing part of it is the passing game. Sean Clifford, Parker Washington, Mitchell Tinsley, Brenton Strange. The passing game was respectable. It was a threat. Yes, the offense turned the ball over more last year. You would like to believe that Sean Clifford or Drew Aller has more potential than Sean Clifford, but that's why Sean Clifford was starting last year. We now know what the coaching staff was seeing is that Drew Aller is not as polished as we've been led to believe. Here on the show, just here in general, and from what we've heard about the progress, right? Other people have done reporting too and say that Drew Aller is and it looks effortless. When he throws the football, it looks effortless, but it's obviously not translating into yards and points. But no defense respects the passing attack. Michigan did early on. Michigan did. Watch the beginning, the first quarter, where Penn State was able to get most of its successful runs right out of the gate. Same thing with Ohio State. Ohio State had two safeties back and basically said, all right, we're going to test the waters and see what Penn State can do offensively. Oh no, Penn State's getting 5 to 10 yards per carry because Singleton and Allen are talented. This offensive line is good. And Michigan and Ohio State said, to heck with it. We don't respect your passing attack because you won't go to it. And so they stack the box, and then Singleton and Allen can't go anywhere. I know Allen's still getting the yards. He's still finding it. Katron Allen, 6 yards per carry on 12 carries. Singleton, 3.3 on 13 carries. Why are they splitting reps? Katron should get the bulk of the carries. Why are they doing it? Same reason that they've said all season. James Franklin and the coaching staff, Jay One-Sider has a lot of input in this as the co-offensive coordinator, and he's not calling plays, but he has obviously one of the biggest hands when it comes to selecting how they're going to game plan for opponents, right? There's a lot of people involved in this. It's not just Mike Yursich. It's not just James Franklin. There's Danny O'Brien. There's Jay One-Sider. Okay, but this is about the running backs. Penn State is sticking with its plan that you don't want to wear down. So you run Katron Allen as much as you can through the first 3 quarters. What happens when you get to the 4th quarter? Katron Allen's not going to be at full strength. He's not going to be at 100%. If he is, he's superhuman, and maybe he is because we haven't seen him. We haven't asked him to do that yet. But Penn State has admitted, James Franklin says, we do not want to burn the tread on the tires, and not directly, but he has said that we don't want to overwork the running back. The running back position is the shortest average career span in the NFL for a reason, because they take the most hits. It is one of the most brutal positions. I would put the linebacker in there, obviously, because that's the counterpart. Offensive line too, right? And on offensive line, you're getting hit every single play, but you can seriously take some brutal hits as a running back. And I know that Allen and Singleton would attest to that, but that's the point. You don't want to overload them. When you have 2 talented running backs, why not have them both at 100%? But I understand. Play the hot hand. Play the hot hand. Go with the streak. If you are on fire, you keep doing the things that you're doing. A shooter in a basketball game. If something's working for you, if that spot on the 3-point line's working for you and you're making your shots there, you keep going back to it. Same thing can be said for running backs in football. If your one running back's doing better than the other, ride the hot hand. Another comment, and then we're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our awesome sponsors. James Franklin is allergic to winning the big games. Well, he's under 500 in just about every category. He's almost under 200 in other categories, one of them being Ohio State and Michigan. To this point in time, Penn State has lost 3 in a row to Michigan. And if it wasn't for the blocked field goal in 2016, James Franklin would be 0-11 against Ohio State. Think about that. You needed a miracle play to beat the Buckeyes to have 1 win against them. Now you are 1-10. And then, yeah, they come to Beaver Stadium next season, but who knows? Both rosters are going to go through a lot of changes, and it's hard to project what it's going to look like. But that becomes every time you lose, it mounts and becomes that much more pressure to end that losing streak. I think it's appropriate time to take a break. I appreciate your comments. This conversation is great. I like that we're actually having a discussion about Penn State football. But let's continue with this here on Locked On Nittany Lions in just a second. But how about we hear from another one of our great sponsors on the show, and that is LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Appreciate all of you in the chat keeping this appropriate, right? Talking about Penn State football, the good and the bad, having your questions. I love answering your questions because there are some things. It's like, what's going on? Why are these decisions happening? They don't make sense. Let's try to make sense of them together. I do want to go back to the topic I started with, the mistakes from the game, because that's what this episode is, talking about the mistakes that happened in this game against Michigan, the reasons why Penn State lost when they really could have won. Michigan didn't do anything crazy. They ran the ball 32 times. This was the ideal scenario for Penn State to welcome Michigan in without its head coach into a hostile Beaver Stadium, the best defense, the most hostile environment that Michigan had faced all season, and it was messed up. You messed it up. Play calling. That is probably the third most egregious mistake here, or I guess the fourth in this case, depending on how you want to combine them. Going for the 2 late in the game, 24-15, the deficit. Going for it on fourth down at your own 30. I would say that's your second biggest mistake. Being inconsistent, and now we're at play calling. I just don't like to give an example. I don't like how Michigan on 3rd and 2, they bring out 7, 8 offensive linemen. JJ McCarthy's out of shotgun, Blake Corum to his right, to his left, whatever. And it's not even a quarterback sneak. They don't even try to do anything fancy with JJ McCarthy. They took the ball completely out of his hands. And McCarthy is supposed to be a projected first-round pick in next year's draft. And Michigan said, no, today it is not on McCarthy whatsoever. Just don't turn the football over. You're handing it off. You are a game manager system quarterback today, and you need to fall in line, right? And it almost seemed like Penn State did that too to Drew Aller. They took the ball out of his hands. But I'll give the example before I get to Drew Aller and the questionable play calling, the way the play design, the game plan as a whole. Michigan on 3rd and 2 can line up and say, all right, we're going 7 offensive linemen. JJ McCarthy is going to hand it off to Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards. Good luck stopping it. We're doing it, and you can't stop it. And nine times out of 10, that's what happened. Penn State's defense did stop them a few of those times when it was telegraphed, right? You knew it was coming, and they did stop it. Other times, more often than not, right, over 60%, it felt like 7 out of 10 times truly Michigan won that play. And Penn State's defense did get theirs, but the Wolverines kept extending drives with that. Why is it that on 4th and 1, this just made me, I swear, watching it, why does Penn State have to run a fake running back pass? Okay, you start doing all these things to your formation. You have guys lining up everywhere, and then you motion, you break formation because you can do that, right? You can change your play and then have everybody shift around, right? Katron Allen gets a pitch. Michigan sees it. Michigan immediately notices that it is a pass. That Katron Allen on 4th and 1 is passing the football. No T formation. He's not running it. Your most powerful back, who clearly is the best candidate to take the football on short yardage situations. On 4th and 1, you pitch it out with the idea in mind that Drew Aller on that I know it worked. But Michigan says, hey, we're going to go 7 offensive linemen, hand the ball off to Blake Corum. Good luck stopping it. That's the play call. It's on the wristband. I know that's what it's called verbatim, right? That's what it is. And then for Penn State, they're going, we're going to go T formation. We're going to break out of it. We're going to shift guys around. We're going to get Drew Aller out of a shotgun. We're going to see if we can try to confuse Michigan. Then we're going to pitch it out to Katron Allen on 4th and 1. He's not actually going to run it. He's going to see if Dante Cephas or Keandre Lambert-Smith can get open because that's his first read. Oh, no, Michigan has recognized it. So we're going to throw it all the way back across the formation to Drew Aller, our quarterback. I know it worked, but why do you have to do – that's a 3rd and 10 play. At least I think it would be. That's a 3rd and 10 play desperation, like we need this. And it was called on 4th and 1 when Penn State has finally the best offensive line to do this, either has a 240-pound quarterback to run the QB sneak or the power back in Katron Allen to do the same thing that Michigan does. We are going to run the football right at you, and we're going to dare you to try and stop it. Why can't Penn State do that? Why does it take all of that to get 1 yard? I know it kept the drive alive, kept the drive going. They scored on that. They scored on that. I just don't like it. I don't like it. That's a mentality thing that Michigan can keep it very basic, very vanilla, very simple. And Penn State has to do all these gymnastics. They have to do all these different things just to convert a 4th and 1 in enemy territory. So the play calling as a whole, right? You start with that. And then it's inconsistent. This game was just inconsistent in general. Penn State just had no confidence in its plan, in its identity. We've heard that this is an elite. We're going to play defense and we're going to rely on our running game. We're going to grind you down. And it was working early on. It was working. Penn State had the advantage to start, and this becomes a coaching problem because right away, Sharon Moore, whoever got together, the coaching staff as a whole, I know Moore was acting as the head coach, but you can't tell me that this wasn't a committee effort to try to get the best game plan available for Michigan. So all hands on deck. As soon as the first 2 drives went haywire for Michigan, they instantly made those changes, took the football out of McCarthy's hands, at least throwing it. They took his throwing arm away and had him running the football and everything else, and it worked. But they didn't radically change their game plan, but they made necessary changes that just kept Penn State off balance. And then Penn State doesn't adjust. They make the adjustments, but they don't. So they say, all right, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to have some success running the football here, but then we're going to get a little inconsistent with how we use Drew Aller in the passing game. We're going to say, we're going to run the football a variety of different ways, some of which might have some success, some of them that don't, rather than the balance. It was the balance that was working. You had play action. You had Drew Aller making some of the right reads. The first one wasn't there. Boom. Second one, check down. Penn State looked decent enough on offense in the first half, and then I don't know what happened in the second half. But the play calling for Drew Aller, this comment was made. Drew Aller was ice cold in the fourth quarter. You can't say this to your 5-star passing pocket quarterback. Aller, we are not going to trust you to throw the football. We are going to use you as a runner on design plays, or you have the option to. Now, Drew Aller doesn't always have a design run. He did tuck it and run himself. He made that decision when he saw it, and it was good. I saw good instincts out of Drew Aller for most of the game. But then in the fourth quarter, you're playing from behind now, and it's like, okay, Drew Aller, we haven't asked you to throw the football all game. You're probably it's like an ice cold pinch hitter coming off the bench. And good luck. You got to be warm after seeing a pitcher for the first time. Try to break up the no-hitter in this sense. I know I keep making these cross sports references, but I think they fit. I really do. And now Drew Aller is not set up for success because there's no confidence. You told Aller for 3 quarters that we do not trust you. We do not trust the passing game. And maybe it's rightfully so, because the passing game has struggled all season long, and Michigan and Ohio State's defenses are top 5. That's crazy to think that the Big Ten has 3 top 5 defenses. That's really wild to think to me, that Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State are all in the top 5 when it comes to defense. So the play calling and when your quarterback is already, it seems Drew Aller is lacking confidence as it is, timidness, afraid to make that big mistake against Rutgers and Michigan State. I don't know, but now that the season, the best case scenario is going 10-2 and some sort of New Year's 6 bowl game against some random opponent. Why not just, say, you know what, we're going to practice we're going to have Drew Aller throw the ball 50, 60 times a game. Why not? What do you have to lose at this point? It helps you in the long run, because Drew Aller is going to be your starting quarterback next season. You could hypothetically have Dante Cephas, Keandre Lambert-Smith, and Trey Wallace all back next year. Cephas has eligibility. KLS has eligibility. Wallace obviously does, because he hasn't been in the program as long. He's not a true veteran. But you could have your 3 starting wide receivers back for next season. Why not get a head start? Because you can still win games against the types of Rutgers and Michigan State by doing a radical change like that. Just throw it deep, run an air raid pro style type of system, and get Drew Aller prepared for the future that way, and build his confidence as a quarterback, as a decision maker. I don't think Drew Aller's not confident in his playmaking ability, because, like I said, it's effortless when he throws the football. He throws such a nice football, but at the same time, it's the decision making, it's the hesitation, it's looking and locking onto your first read, or not allowing that read to continue to develop. So Drew Aller needs to work on his decision-making, and the coaching staff has to call plays to try to, and James Franklin said that. We did not call enough plays to get Drew Aller comfortable, so they admitted it. It's the same, so it goes along with that. The play calling did not allow Aller, your most important player on offense, your quarterback, to get comfortable. Not running Katron Allen more, that's part of it on the offensive play calling. I do feel like in a game to save your season, you have to break script a few times here and there. I get it. You want Singleton and Allen to be as healthy and fresh as possible for not only this game, but for the entirety of the season. So then what's the point of bringing Trey Potts in? What is the point? Because we haven't seen him at all. And Trey Potts would have started at Minnesota this season. Why did he come home to Pennsylvania to just ride the bench? I fully anticipated that there was going to be, let's say, 15 carries for Singleton, 10 for Allen, and something in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 touches for Potts. But instead, he's getting 1 to 2 snaps a game. Not 1 to 2 touches or he was getting 1 to 2 plays where he's not getting the football unless Penn State's blown out UMass or something, right? That's when we see Trey Potts, a veteran in the game of college football. It makes no sense to me when you say we don't want to overwork Singleton and Allen, and then you bring in one of the best additions out of the transfer portal. Any other program would want him to start. Trey Potts would be a starter, and he's a third string running back who sees the field a couple times a game in a serious game. Back to the comments here, just because we are on the subject of play calling from Tyler here. Out of sync on every facet of the offense. Buck stops on the coaches because the talent is clearly there. Yeah, it is, because they're either 5 stars or you can project them as starters anywhere else. Drew Aller's a 5-star. Katron Allen's a high 4-star, right? You're almost splitting hairs. I don't think he'd be a 5-star in the rankings, but he's playing better than Singleton at this point. And Singleton was the best running back prospect in the entire country. He was the Gatorade National Player of the Year. Theo Johnson is an NFL draft pick, probably rounds 2, 3, or 4, somewhere in that neighborhood, right? Dante Cephas will play in the NFL. Keandre Lambert-Smith will play in the NFL. Trey Wallace will play in the NFL. All those guys are, Cephas, I think, was a 3-star, but those guys were former 4-stars that all of which that I named. And the offense isn't able to do anything. Olu Fashanu is going to be a top 5 NFL draft pick. Caden Wallace will play. He'll make an NFL roster. Hunter Norzad will make an NFL roster. Sal Wormley will make an NFL roster. I don't know how much I think they'll be starters on day one? Probably not, but JB Nelson, it grades out very well on PFF. JB Nelson is a really good offensive lineman and has developed well since coming over from Lackawanna College. You are absolutely right, Tyler, when you say the offense is just completely out of sync. What is it? What is it? There's nothing else to play for. Who cares about the rest of the season? Oh, that goes back to talking about what Drew Aller can do, right? I think that Drew Aller can benefit a lot from these final 2 games. Rutgers has a good defense. Rutgers has a really good defense. Get radical at this point. Get completely radical, because what do you benefit? I get it. You get another trophy in the case. You go to a new. This is a big deal. Penn State is not going to sell out its season just so Drew Aller can get a few extra passing attempts here and there. But I'm not asking you to do that. You don't have to sell out your season just to allow Drew Aller to be more comfortable passing the football in college football. Rutgers has a respectable defense for what it's worth. They're going to a bowl game. They played opponents tough. Okay, they're not perfect. They're closer to Iowa. Iowa just beat them on Saturday, right? They beat them today at the time of this live episode. But that I think is a good test at home to allow Drew Aller to continue to grow in his potential as a passer, as a pocket passer. And then Michigan State in the Dome, you feel like that should be an air raid type of game, and that Penn State should dominate and put up 50-plus points against the Spartans, especially with what they've had to go through. Go Blue. Thanks for showing up, Michigan fans. Michigan versus everybody. Appreciate you guys. What a disgusting loss. It stings. It really stings more for the players. There was a lot of emotion again. Drew Aller was upset. Theo Johnson was upset. It's hard to see because they know what they lost at the end of the year. Penn State knows what went wrong here. The aspirations. This team believed that they were a college football playoff contender. I'm not talking about the fans. I'm not talking about the media anymore, including myself. I did believe that this team could go 11-1 and make the college football playoff with some hypothetical tiebreakers. You didn't know in the offseason, but this team knows that they missed the opportunity because they were a college football playoff contender, but you only had 2 opportunities to showcase it, and you lost both of them. They could have beaten Ohio State. They were in that game against Ohio State. I know it's some mental gymnastics and everything, but imagine if Kalen King doesn't hold Marvin Harrison Jr. or that play is not called the way it is by the referees. Curtis Jacobs takes that strip sack fumble for 6 points. Then what? That game could be completely different. Blake Corum fumbles the football inside the 30 in their own territory early in the game, and Drew Aller fumbles it. Let's say that Penn State falls on top of it, or Drew Aller doesn't fumble the ball in the third quarter. These were both one-score games against college football playoff teams. You can't sit back and say just because Penn State finishes 10-2 that they weren't better this year or that they weren't a really good team. Did they lose the games? Yes, but that's what's so disappointing is because Penn State knew. Penn State knew that these were winnable games against Ohio State and Michigan, and it showed because they didn't get blown out 41-17 again against Michigan. They didn't get blown out against Ohio State like Ohio State had built these comfortable leads. Ohio State won by double digits last year, turned it on in the fourth quarter, and proved there was still a significant gap. Penn State went into Columbus, had some bad breaks for them in that game, and it's still finished as a one-score game. Same case with Michigan here. Michigan is a top 4 team. Ohio State's a top 4 team, but against the Wolverines specifically. And Penn State made this a one-score game. The gap was closed. It was, but it was still not enough. And this was a possible scenario here. It is factually correct to say that Penn State was better this year than last year. It is factually correct to say that Penn State was a college football playoff contender. But when it came down to it, they were still not good enough. And maybe that's because Ohio State took a slight step forward. Michigan is still status quo. I don't think that they've had to move forward. They have taken they've stayed the same, or maybe they've taken a slight step forward. Those two teams either stayed the same or got better. So Penn State got better, but so did Ohio State and Michigan. But you can't, it is correct to say that the gap is closed because a year ago, Penn State lost at home in Beaver Stadium to Ohio State by 2 touchdowns. At Michigan, they lost 41-17 and gave up 418 yards on the ground. It was ugly. And then these 2 times around, you go to Columbus, you lose by 8. You welcome Michigan into Beaver Stadium, and instead of getting boat raced, you lose by 8. And you had the opportunity to win the game, or you lose by 9. Excuse me. You lose by 9, 24-15. You lose by 9. You lose by single digits in this case. It should have been a single score game, and they should have had the opportunity to tie it. So what's the excuse now? Well, that's the excuse. That's the excuse in this case. So that's really what, and that's why Penn State is overly emotional. Let me finish with this thought, and there's going to be so much more. I'm going to be doing more of these live shows. I like doing the podcast live to talk to you, to see the comments, to kind of help, continue to further the conversation. I have topics here, but those were Penn State's biggest mistakes, and I felt like outlining those ones there. I outlined all of them, but those were the tangible plays where you could actually look at the game and said, yep, that's what went wrong. The play calling. At some point, when you're running, Drew Aller ran the ball 10 times. He is not a running quarterback. Do I think he's shifty within the pocket? Yes. But he is not a straight line speedster, and he's not a ball carrier. But I'm glad he can move. He can get you 5 to 10 yards when you actually need it. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Ben Roethlisberger. He can't scramble for 40, 50 yards. He can get you 5 to 10 on a 3rd and medium when you absolutely need it, and the defense is not spying him, and that's why Drew Aller kept doing it. But at some point, Drew Aller is not used to carrying the football like that and going into, and Michigan laid some big hits on him. And I'm glad that Drew Aller could take those hits. But at some point, a fumble was going to happen, and it didn't bounce Penn State's way. That's what's going to happen when you continually design quarterback draws. At some point, a linebacker or a safety is going to stand Drew Aller up. A second player from Michigan is going to come in, hit him hard, and the ball is going to get jarred loose. I don't blame Drew Aller in that case. That it goes back to play calling as the big mistake. Singleton and Allen do not fumble routinely, right? They have had fumbles throughout their 2 years at Penn State, but it's still low, and they carry the ball 15 to 20 times a game normally. So they are used to it. Put the ball in your running back's hands if you're going to do that on 3rd and 5. The final thing is because I brought up emotion. So I appreciate all the comments. I didn't get a chance to get to everybody. Thank you, Michigan fans, for joining the chat and talking your smack. College football playoff team. Penn State was there, but what Michigan proved today was that they are still better than Penn State. What Ohio State proved is that they are still better than Penn State. Penn State is on an island. Penn State's on its own because they're not good enough to be elite, but they're too good because I feel like whatever bowl game they get into, they're going to win. They're going to beat whoever they play unless different select guys. I can't predict the roster and who's going to opt out, but they've beaten Washington in a bowl game. They've beaten Utah in a bowl game. It's good because Washington's coming over to the Big Ten, so maybe that's a sign of things to come, right? But Penn State has no problem going outside of the conference. It's being 4-16 against Ohio State, and that's the problem. The mountain is not being an elite team in general. It's being an elite team in your own conference and not being able to catch Michigan and Ohio State. So I'll finish with the emotion. I had an instant recap at Beaver Stadium with Dylan Callaghan-Crowley and Zane Bransfield, who helps out the show. I appreciate their help, and we had a good conversation. I want you to go check that out. But the emotion, this is my final thought here as we approach an hour of just the general thoughts from this game and the mistakes that were made. I feel like Penn State, I don't know if it was the locker room. James Franklin has to be able to keep this in check. There was an element of seriousness that was lacking all season long. Penn State got a big ego out of all of this. And I hope people know where I'm going with this because it shows. Okay, the X's and O's are one thing. College football is very emotional. NFL is more business-like because people are paid week to week. I know there's NIL, so we're going towards more of a business-like thing, but these are still young men, kids. Drew Aller is 19 years old, so I'm not surprised that he's overly emotional. But the emotions for Penn State this season were not well managed whatsoever. I don't know. That obviously falls on coaching, and James Franklin is a very emotional coach, and I like that. It turns into passion when you do it the right way. When it's not handled the right way, it turns into a lack of self-confidence and big mistakes because you don't trust yourself, and you don't believe in yourself, and then those negative emotions overtake you. Or it's like when you get really too angry and then you start causing unnecessary penalties, right? That's how, if it manifests itself that way. And I want to compare this to Michigan, but Penn State did not take this season seriously enough. You are going on the road to Columbus. And I know some of these things are out of Penn State's control in terms of the virality, right, of those clips. James Franklin, right, the calling out Michigan, that he says that they play too soft of a schedule. Look, if the shoe fits, Michigan fans, if the shoe fits. But that's not what James Franklin's comment was about. James Franklin's comment was about strategically scheduling opponents that are not going to threaten you because you have a conference schedule that can get you into the college football playoff. And he didn't even name Michigan. Other schools in the Big Ten are doing it too. Okay, Penn State. James Franklin said Penn State is doing it. We are trying to do it because now you don't need to go outside of your conference to bolster your resume. Next year, you got Washington, you got Wisconsin, you got Ohio State, all in the same time frame, back to back to back. 2024 schedule is awful. But as I go off on these tangents, I want to bring you back to the main point. If Penn State had an ego, Penn State was blowing out UMass, West Virginia, shutting out Iowa. It felt like Penn State's Super Bowl this season was Iowa. That should have been more of a business type of thing. Hearing the things that, the coaching staff and the players really taking that one personally, that's fine. I have no problem with that passion against Iowa, returning the favor. But where is that same energy, that business-like energy for the games against Ohio State and Michigan? Because a really good program that didn't have its ego inflated would have had no nonsense. I'm talking no nonsense whatsoever. No viral clips from press conferences, little to no interviews or anything. Just being very careful because it felt like, you notice how nothing came out of Ohio State's camp the week of the Penn State-Ohio State game. Penn State had all these media distractions. The football team had media distractions. James Franklin's on the Pat McAfee show. There's a reporter that's getting dragged, right? All that stuff. I think about that. Those are distractions, and Penn State didn't handle them, even the slightest thing. Do I think that Penn State, they lost the football game to Ohio State because that happened? No, but it didn't help. It took away from your focus. And then you see things like, don't give anything to Michigan to fuel the fire. Why I bring Michigan in this conversation is because they're highly emotional too, but they channel it very well. whatever the reason is, they channel it very well. Instead of using the Jim Harbaugh no-show suspension as a distraction, they use it as motivation. And I understand as a brand, as Penn State, but I think back to this clip. And no, this clip is not why Penn State lost. But when Manny Diaz is doing a little bit saying, hey, know the signs and everything else, people saw that viral clip. I thought it was funny. I'm going to post it out because I want to share it with you as a Penn State fan base. But I don't encourage that. I don't. In the biggest game of the season, we're making jokes. Michigan saw that. And what did Blake Corum do? After that what did Blake Corum do when Michigan went up 24-9 against Penn State? He did the sign thing. They see these things. They use them. So these silly distractions, I feel like Penn State got swept up in the moment. They had beaten Iowa, and it felt like there was this return to Camelot. And that was why you want to know why the season is not where it is, because Penn State felt like it finished its checklist. I really can sit here and say that. The Nittany Lions, from a subconscious point of view, they had felt like they got one demon, something that was lingering on their shoulder in the Iowa Hawkeyes, because they returned the favor of knocking them out of the top 5 back in 2021 and finishing with the 7-6 record. That was one point of revenge. But it feels like subconsciously they were content with that. It was good enough for them. It wasn't good enough because then they would have blocked out all the distractions. It would have been straight line answers to reporters. It wouldn't have been any gimmicks at practice to try to make a point of saying just throw it deep is silly. I hope everyone understands what I'm trying to talk about here. Ohio State didn't have where's Ryan Day's viral press conference? Where's Jim Harbaugh's viral press conference bits? There are none, because it's very businesslike. There are no clips. There are no things that are used for bulletin board material from Ohio State and Michigan's camp, because they knew how to keep that stuff under wraps. The emotions got the best of Penn State, and that's what I mean. It can negatively manifest itself, and that's what happened. Penn State got too big of an ego by hearing the college football playoff talk from me, right? I was wrong. I'm not afraid to admit that, but I can still say that they were a college football playoff contender. But instead of Penn State embracing it and acting like it, they decided that they were too good for that title, that they were now good enough. Because even though they've only beaten Penn State once, they've only beaten Ohio State once out of the past 10, 11 tries, right? James Franklin is now 1-10 against Ohio State. They felt like, yeah, we can have, instead, they didn't shut everything down. It's business-like, straightforward answers, no joking, no gimmicks, no bits, nothing. Don't give any motivation to the other team. And I'm not saying that is the reason why Penn State lost these games, but it does not help. It does not help. Michigan used all of the negative attention and somehow turned it into motivation and something to continue to win. Penn State did not do that. I felt like they gave too many little things to the opponent. Ohio State, completely quiet. You didn't hear anything from the Buckeyes that week. Business, because they have been there. They know what it's like and how to handle the expectations of being a college football playoff contender. This Penn State team did not, and I hope that they can learn from it and go into it next season when everyone's older. I feel like, just by a logical conclusion, that Penn State now understands what it's like to handle the pressure and the emotion of actually being in the college football playoff conversation at the beginning of the season. Now they can take that and move forward with it next year when Drew Allar's in his 3rd year of college football. Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen, Tyler Warren's back. Hopefully Keandre Lambert-Smith, Dante Cephas, Trey Wallace. Look how deep this offense can be. All those guys who have talent with another year of experience and another offseason to work together and to gel. Coordinators changing and all that stuff. We don't know what this roster is going to ultimately look like, but you get my point. They now have had that experience of understanding the pressure and the expectations. Logically, you hope that they adapt with it, but I can't sit here a year later right now, a year in advance, to try to make that prediction. But that's my assumption, that logically they should be able to handle it better, because this time they were not prepared for those expectations. They really weren't. Young quarterback, first time being in the college football playoff conversation legitimately. It wasn't just the local media, the national media. ESPN, CBS, NBC all thought that Penn State was a legitimate contender and had an outside shot of making the top 4 and could upend the Big Ten Conference. And they didn't do it. And that's what we learned today. And that's the biggest mistake of them all, really. That's the biggest mistake of them all from this Penn State versus Michigan game. I couldn't get to all the comments, and I'm glad I couldn't because there's some nasty ones in there, but I appreciate everyone who had an intelligent comment, one to continue the conversation, two that joined this show, and do it more. Subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, to keep up with the conversations. We're going to have more of a condensed, direct recap, as there's still things to address from this game. There really are, and there are big picture ideas. I didn't even talk about Mike. I did talk about the offensive play calling, but I didn't talk about Mike Yurcich specifically. There are a lot of people that want to fire him. I am not going to sit here and do that because that's not my job, but it's important to carry on the discussion of where Mike Yurcich is good, but also where he's let down the team. What happens to Manny? Everyone's saying promote Manny Diaz and let James Franklin go. That's a conversation in itself. So let's have all of them here on Locked On Nittany Lions. I appreciate all of you. Thanks for supporting the show. And we'll keep talking about Penn State football, men's basketball here on the channel devoted to it, the podcast, the show devoted to it, Locked On Nittany Lions.